The Soviet Union's military reputation didn't die in Moscow. It died in the mountains of Afghanistan. Not in a single battle, not in one dramatic collapse, but in a slow, grinding realization. The world discovered the Red Army wasn't invincible, and once that illusion shattered, the empire followed. This is the story of how military superpowers actually decline. Not in theory, not in patriotic speeches, in practice. Military collapse does not begin with defeat on the battlefield. It begins with hollowing out, quietly, gradually. Budget cuts disguised as efficiency. Recruitment shortfalls blamed on culture. Equipment aging while procurement stalls. Training shortened to meet quotas. Standards lowered to fill ranks. Morale eroding behind press releases. At first, none of it is visible. The bases are still there. The aircraft carriers still sail. The generals still speak with confidence. Allies still trust the guarantees. Enemies still hesitate. But beneath the surface, something fundamental is rotting. Reputation continues. Capability declines, and that gap grows. History shows that once the gap between reputation and reality becomes too large, one event exposes it. One war, one campaign, one humiliating withdrawal, a defeat that should not have happened. And suddenly the emperor has no clothes. That's when decline accelerates. Allies hedge, enemies probe. The military that once projected strength becomes a liability. The empire discovers it can no longer project force. It happened to Rome, it happened to France, it happened to the Soviet Union. And in every case, the pattern was identical. Peak strength. Internal decay, reputation carrying beyond capability, a moment of exposure, then cascade, then collapse. The pattern does not depend on ideology, geography, or culture. It depends on math. You cannot maintain dominance with a shrinking force. You cannot sustain readiness with aging equipment. Rome believed its legions were eternal. France believed the Maginot Line made it untouchable. The United States reached its peak military dominance in 1991. The Gulf War was overwhelming. 100 hours. Precision weapons, satellite coordination, air supremacy. The world watched and concluded American military dominance was permanent. But military decline never announces itself. It creeps, and the warning signs follow the same sequence every time. History proves the pattern exists. The question is where we are inside it. When you map them out, you see something uncomfortable, because the stages are measurable, observable. And once you understand the sequence, you can recognize it unfolding in real time. The blueprint. Rome's long decline. To understand how military superpowers actually die, you have to start with the blueprint, Rome. At its peak, the Roman military was the most advanced fighting force on Earth. Professional soldiers, standardized equipment, engineering mastery, disciplined formations. They conquered Gaul, Britain, Egypt, Judea, Spain, North Africa. From Scotland to Syria, 3 continents answered to Rome. In 117 AD, under Emperor Trajan, Rome reached maximum territorial expansion. That was stage 1, real strength, real dominance, no illusions. But peak power contains the seed of decline, because maintaining empire is more expensive than building it. By 250 AD, something had shifted. Recruitment was harder. Roman citizens were less willing to serve. The culture that once glorified military duty had softened. So Rome adjusted. Standards were lowered. Foreign mercenaries were recruited. Germanic tribes, Goths, Huns, anyone willing to fight. By 350 AD, a significant portion of Roman forces were not Roman at all. They fought for pay, not loyalty. Equipment quality declined. The famous Roman armor became thinner, training shortened, discipline weakened. But the reputation held. When Roman banners appeared, enemies still retreated. For centuries, Rome had been unstoppable, and memory carried weight long after capability faded. This was stage 3, reputation intact, foundation rotting. Internally, leaders knew something was wrong. The treasury strained under military costs. Political corruption spread. Emperors rose and fell rapidly. But the public face remained confident. The illusion of strength persisted. Then came August 9th, 378 AD, the Battle of Adrianople. The Roman Emperor Valens faced a Gothic force. The Goths were not supposed to win. They were refugees turned rebels. They lacked Rome's engineering. But they had mobility. They had cohesion. And Rome had overestimated itself. The Roman army was crushed. Emperor Valens was killed. 2/3 of his force destroyed. This was the moment. The gap between reputation and reality was exposed. For the first time, Rome looked beatable. And once enemies believe you can bleed, they test you again. Within decades, barbarian tribes crossed Roman borders freely. Allies stopped trusting Roman protection. Then in 410 AD, only 32 years after Adrianople, Alaric and the Visigoths sacked Rome. The city that had not fallen in 800 years fell in 3 days. The empire staggered on until 476 AD, but the military was finished. Germanic warlords commanded what used to be Roman legions. The pattern was complete. Peak strength, internal hollowing, reputation masking decay. A single defeat exposing truth. Cascade. Collapse. Rome did not collapse because it lost one battle. It collapsed because the military institution had eroded long before the battle. Adrianople was revelation, not cause, and that distinction matters. Because every superpower believes it is different. Every superpower believes its institutions are permanent. Rome believed its legions were eternal. But eternity ended the moment reality caught up. And the lesson is simple. Military decline is not sudden. The exposure is sudden. The decay is slow. And once exposure happens, recovery becomes almost impossible. Because reputation, once shattered, never fully returns. And enemies never forget the moment they saw you fall. France. The illusion of strength. If Rome gives us the slow-motion version of military decline, France gives us the accelerated one. After World War I, France was not weak. It was victorious. It had endured 4 years of trench warfare. It had absorbed Germany's full assault, and it had survived. By 1918, France possessed one of the largest and most battle-hardened armies in Europe. Its generals were respected. Its doctrine was proven. Its people believed their military was unbreakable. That was stage one, real strength, earned through blood. But victory creates complacency, and complacency is the quiet beginning of decline. After World War I, France built the Maginot Line, a vast network of concrete fortifications along the German border. Bunkers, artillery, reinforced underground rail systems. It was engineering brilliance. It symbolized permanence, security, invincibility. The problem wasn't the fortifications themselves. The problem was what they represented. France prepared to fight the last war again. Static defense, attrition, slow mobilization. Meanwhile, Germany adapted. German officers studied mobility, concentrated armor, coordinated air support, speed, shock, encirclement, blitzkrieg. France had tanks, more tanks than Germany. It had manpower. It had artillery. But it did not have doctrinal evolution. Its tanks were scattered in infantry support roles. Its command structure was rigid. Communication was slow. Officers waited for instructions instead of acting independently. This was stage 2, internal stagnation, hidden behind visible strength. The Maginot Line looked impressive. The army looked massive. The reputation remained intact. Britain trusted French military power. Poland relied on French guarantees. Belgium assumed French defense would hold. This was stage 3, reputation carrying beyond capability. The gap widened. Then came May 10th, 1940. Germany invaded. The world expected another long war, years of trench fighting, slow advances. But Germany didn't attack the Maginot Line directly. They went around it, through the Ardennes forest. French command insisted tanks couldn't move through that terrain. They were wrong. German panzer divisions punched through at Sedan. Within days, French defenses collapsed. German forces cut Allied armies in half. The British evacuated at Dunkirk. The French government fled Paris. On June 22nd, France surrendered. 6 weeks. The strongest army in Europe destroyed in 6 weeks. Not because it lacked numbers, not because it lacked equipment, because it lacked adaptability. Because its doctrine had decayed while its reputation remained. This was stage 4, exposure. The illusion shattered instantly. And once shattered, collapse accelerated. France did not slowly retreat over decades. It imploded. The empire dissolved. Colonies questioned loyalty. Military prestige evaporated. France would never again be a first-tier military power. The pattern held: peak strength, internal stagnation, reputation masking decay, one test revealing the truth, then rapid collapse. The most dangerous moment in military decline is not when capability falls. It is when leadership believes reputation will compensate. France believed its past victories guaranteed future success. It believed fortifications could substitute for innovation. It believed the enemy would fight the way it expected. Reality corrected those assumptions, brutally and permanently. Because once the world sees you defeated quickly, it never views you the same again. The lesson is not courage, but adaptation. Mistaking historical prestige for readiness is fatal. The pattern was accelerating, and history would prove it even faster. The Soviet illusion of invincibility. If Rome was slow decline and France was rapid collapse, the Soviet Union was the modern version. Massive, intimidating, feared. In 1945, the Red Army stood in Berlin. It had crushed Nazi Germany. It had absorbed millions of casualties and kept advancing. It fielded the largest tank force on Earth. It possessed nuclear weapons. It dominated Eastern Europe. For decades, the Soviet military was the symbol of unstoppable force. When the Soviets rolled into Hungary in 1956, resistance collapsed quickly. When they entered Czechoslovakia in 1968, it took 1 day. The message was clear. The USSR was invincible inside its sphere. That was stage 1, genuine power, real capacity. But by the 1970s, decline had begun. Quietly. Conscription filled the ranks, but morale suffered. Soldiers didn't want to serve. Training became procedural. Innovation slowed. Equipment maintenance declined. Corruption spread through the officer corps. Budgets were enormous, but resources were misallocated. Leadership prioritized optics over readiness. On paper, the Soviet military still looked overwhelming. 5 million troops, thousands of tanks, a nuclear arsenal capable of ending the world. But internal hollowing was underway. That was stage 2, and the reputation remained intact. Western analysts feared Soviet aggression. Eastern European states obeyed Moscow. Afghanistan seemed like a minor operation when it began. In December 1979, install a friendly regime, stabilize the country, withdraw in months. It should have been easy. Afghanistan had no air force, no navy, no industrial base. The Soviet military had helicopters, armored divisions, artillery, modern weapons. But Afghanistan exposed something deeper. The Soviet military was built for conventional war in Europe. Mass formations, rapid armored pushes, air superiority over open terrain. It was not built for insurgency, not built for mountainous guerrilla warfare, not built for endless attrition without decisive victory. Morale collapsed quickly. Drug abuse rose, desertion increased, supply chains faltered, officers falsified reports. The Mujahideen adapted. Ambushes, improvised explosives, Stinger missiles supplied by the United States, Soviet helicopters fell from the sky, convoys were destroyed. 10 years. 10 years against fighters with rifles. 15,000 Soviet soldiers dead, billions spent. And in February 1989, the last Soviet soldier crossed the bridge out of Afghanistan. Humiliation. That was stage 4, the exposure moment. The invincible Red Army had been fought to exhaustion by insurgents. The world saw it. Eastern Europe saw it. If the Soviet Union could not win in Afghanistan, how could it enforce control in Poland, in East Germany, in Hungary? Within 2 years, the Berlin Wall fell. The Warsaw Pact dissolved. By December 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. The military collapse preceded the political collapse, just like Rome, just like France. The pattern held again. Peak strength, internal decay, reputation masking decline, one conflict revealing the truth. Cascade, collapse. The Soviet Union did not collapse because Afghanistan was strategically decisive. It collapsed because Afghanistan shattered the myth. And once the myth dies, the empire's grip weakens everywhere. Military power depends on perception as much as capability. Once perception fails, deterrence fails. And when deterrence fails, enemies move, allies hedge, history accelerates. The Soviet Union believed its military scale guaranteed permanence. It discovered scale without readiness is illusion. An illusion never survives prolonged testing. 3 empires, 3 identical sequences, and each collapse happened faster than the last. Because the modern world moves faster, information spreads instantly, and once weakness is visible, it cannot be hidden again. The 6 stages of military death. Now that you've seen Rome, France, the Soviet Union, you can see the structure. It's not random. It's not emotional. It's mechanical. Every military superpower collapse follows 6 stages. Stage 1, peak dominance. This is real strength. Not myth, not memory. Actual superiority. Technology ahead of rivals. Recruitment strong. Morale high. Training rigorous. Enemies avoid direct confrontation. Allies rely confidently on guarantees. Rome at 100 AD, France in 1918, the Soviet Union in 1945, the United States in 1991. Stage 2. Internal hollowing begins. The decline does not announce itself. It hides behind budget spreadsheets. Recruitment targets start getting missed. Standards are lowered quietly. Equipment replacement is delayed. Training hours are reduced to cut costs. Bureaucracy expands. Innovation slows. But public messaging remains confident. The decline is internal, invisible. Stage 3, reputation carries the illusion. This is the most dangerous phase. Capability has declined significantly, but reputation remains intact. Enemies still hesitate. Allies still trust. The world continues behaving as if the military is as strong as it once was. Internally, leaders know readiness is questionable. Maintenance backlogs grow, but externally, the myth still protects you. Stage 4, the exposure event. A conflict that should be easy. A campaign that should succeed. A test that should reinforce dominance. Instead, it exposes weakness. A defeat that reveals the gap between perception and reality. This moment changes everything. Rome at Adrianople, 378 AD, France in 6 weeks, 1940. The Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, 1989. This is the pivot point. Stage 5, the cascade. Once weakness is visible, enemies probe, allies hedge. Multiple challenges emerge simultaneously. Commitment strain, confidence erodes. The military that once deterred conflict now invites it. Rome endured multiple invasions after 378. France lost its empire rapidly after 1940. The Soviet Union lost Eastern Europe within 2 years. Stage 6, loss of power projection. The empire can no longer defend its interests abroad. Bases close, allies realign. The superpower becomes regional or collapses entirely. Rome in 476 AD, France permanently after World War II, the Soviet Union in 1991. 6 stages, 3 empires, identical sequence. The timeline compresses each time. The modern world moves faster. Information spreads instantly. Markets react immediately. Alliances shift rapidly. And once exposure happens, recovery becomes exponentially harder. Because military power is not only about hardware, it is about belief. Once belief breaks, the strategic environment transforms overnight. And that brings us to the present. The United States reached stage 1 in 1991. The question is not whether the 6 stages exist. History proves they do. The question is simple. Where are we now inside that sequence? Stage 1 and Stage 2, America's peak and the quiet shift. Stage 1 for the United States was not subtle. It was televised. The Gulf War. 100 hours of ground combat. The 4th largest army on Earth dismantled with precision. Satellite coordination, stealth aircraft, smart bombs striking targets through windows, overwhelming air superiority. The world watched in disbelief. This was not just victory, it was dominance. The United States demonstrated it could fight and win a major conventional war faster than anyone imagined possible. The doctrine at the time was clear. America could fight 2 major wars simultaneously and win both. That was real strength, real readiness, real superiority. Enemies recalculated. Allies trusted without hesitation. That was stage 1. But peak dominance is expensive, and maintaining it is harder than achieving it. After 2001, America entered prolonged wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. At first, success seemed rapid. Regimes collapsed quickly, but occupation stretched on. Years turned into decades. Equipment wore down faster than it could be replaced. Vehicles were deployed repeatedly, aircraft flew constant rotations, personnel served multiple combat tours. The defense budget grew enormous, but most of that growth went to operations. Fuel, logistics, contractors, maintenance, not modernization. Procurement programs stalled. The F-22 production line was cut short. The Navy shrank from over 500 ships in the 1990s to under 300. The Army downsized after Iraq. The Air Force began flying aircraft older than many of its pilots. At the same time, recruitment became harder. The pool of eligible candidates shrank, obesity rates rose, educational standards slipped. The military quietly adjusted requirements. Waivers increased, bonuses rose, standards softened. Publicly, everything looked stable. The budget exceeded $700 billion, then $800 billion, but large budgets do not equal readiness. A growing share went to personnel costs and pensions. Only a fraction went to replacing aging platforms. This was stage 2, internal hollowing, disguised by large numbers. Disguised by technological optimism, disguised by rhetoric about efficiency and modernization. Meanwhile, potential rivals adapted. China began expanding its navy at unprecedented speed. Russia modernized missile systems. Cyber warfare evolved. Hypersonic weapons entered development. The global battlefield was changing, and America was stretched across multiple theaters simultaneously. But the reputation held. Allies still relied on American guarantees. NATO trusted Washington. Japan and South Korea believed the deterrent was firm. Taiwan assumed support would come. The name United States military still carried weight. The world still believed in the memory of 1991, and that belief delayed the reckoning. But history shows something critical. Stage 2 always feels manageable. The decline appears incremental, fixable, temporary. No empire ever recognizes it as irreversible while it's happening. Rome didn't, France didn't, the Soviet Union didn't. They all believed they could correct course. The question is not whether decline begins quietly. It always does. The question is, what happens when that quiet decline faces a public test? Because stage 3 is illusion, stage 4 is exposure, and exposure changes everything. Stage 3 and stage 4, the illusion breaks. By 2020, the United States had entered stage 3. Reputation intact, capability strained. From the outside, American military power still looked overwhelming. 11 aircraft carriers, hundreds of overseas bases, the most advanced fighter jets in the world, a nuclear triad, global logistics unmatched. No nation dared direct confrontation. China avoided open conflict. Russia acted carefully. Allies still trusted the guarantees. But internally, the warning signs were multiplying. Recruitment targets were being missed. Equipment maintenance backlogs were growing. Only about half of Air Force fighters were mission capable. Ships were spending more time in repair than at sea. The B-52 bomber, first flown in 1955, was still a core platform. The Minuteman III missile system dated to the 1970s. Programs like the F-35 were years behind schedule and over budget. Meanwhile, China's Navy surpassed the U.S. in ship count. Hypersonic weapons emerged that could threaten aircraft carriers. Supply chains proved fragile. Stockpiles of precision munitions shrank faster than they could be replenished. But reputation masked all of it. Allies still believed. Markets still assumed American dominance. The name alone deterred conflict. That was stage 3, the illusion phase. Then came August 2021. Afghanistan, 20 years, $2 trillion. An Afghan army trained and equipped by the United States. Modern rifles, armored vehicles, air support, logistics, advisors. The Taliban had rifles, pickup trucks, improvised explosives. The assumption was clear. The Afghan government would hold. Maybe for months, maybe for years. Instead, it collapsed in 11 days. 11. The Taliban entered Kabul without serious resistance. The world watched chaotic evacuation scenes, crowds at the airport, Afghans clinging to aircraft. 13 American service members killed in a suicide bombing. The final U.S. aircraft lifting off. Billions of dollars in equipment left behind. Helicopters, armored vehicles, weapons. This was stage 4, the exposure event. Not because withdrawal alone equals defeat, but because the speed and disorder shattered the image of control. The world saw it. China saw it. Russia saw it. Iran saw it. Allies saw it. What did its guarantees truly mean? The gap between reputation and capability was visible, just like Rome after Adrianople, just like France after Sedan, just like the Soviet Union after Afghanistan. The exposure moment changes the strategic environment. Allies hedge, enemies test, confidence erodes. And once reputation cracks, it does not easily repair itself. Stage 4 is not the end, it is the pivot. What follows determines whether decline slows or accelerates into cascade. Stage 5, the cascade begins. Stage 4 is exposure, stage 5 is acceleration. Once weakness becomes visible, the strategic environment shifts. Not gradually, rapidly. Enemies test, allies hedge, commitments multiply, pressure increases in multiple theaters at once. That is the cascade, and the cascade never happens in isolation. It happens everywhere, all at once. China increases pressure on Taiwan, air incursions rise, naval exercises intensify, missile ranges expand. The message is calculated, testing. Russia pushes deeper into Ukraine, signals toward the Baltics, demonstrates it can absorb sanctions and endure. Iran harasses shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, funds proxies across the Middle East. North Korea launches missiles, signals unpredictability. Individually, none of these actions guarantee collapse, but collectively, they strain capacity, because global dominance requires simultaneous deterrence. You must be credible everywhere. The moment you are stretched thin in one theater, others notice, and they move. War games conducted by American defense institutions repeatedly show a similar conclusion. In a direct conflict over Taiwan, the United States would struggle to project sufficient force quickly enough, not because American soldiers lack courage, not because individual systems are inferior, but because logistics matter. Distance matters, stockpiles matter, ship count matters, industrial capacity matters. China builds ships faster than the United States replaces them. China concentrates its military within its region. The United States distributes forces globally, spread thin, strong everywhere in theory, strong nowhere decisively in practice. The cascade forces hard choices. Which ally do you prioritize? Which commitment do you honor? Which theater do you reinforce? Every choice signals weakness somewhere else, and allies begin calculating independently. Saudi Arabia engages China diplomatically. European leaders discuss strategic autonomy. South Korea debates strengthening independent deterrence. When allies prepare alternatives, they are signaling doubt, not rebellion. Doubt. Doubt is contagious. The Roman Empire experienced it after Adrianople. Germanic tribes crossed borders more frequently. France experienced it after 1940. Colonial possessions reconsidered loyalty. The Soviet Union experienced it after Afghanistan. Eastern Europe broke away within 2 years. The cascade phase is not about one catastrophic battle. It is about simultaneous erosion. Confidence declines. Enemies coordinate pressure. Allies diversify risk. The empire spends more to maintain less influence. And because the modern world moves faster, this phase accelerates faster than any historical example. Information spreads instantly. Markets react instantly. Perception shifts instantly. Stage 5 does not guarantee collapse, but it guarantees instability. And once instability becomes permanent, Stage 6 is no longer theoretical. It becomes logistical inevitability. Stage 6, when projection ends. Stage 5 is pressure. Stage 6 is contraction. This is the final phase. Not dramatic collapse, not a single surrender ceremony, a strategic retreat, the moment when a superpower can no longer project force globally. Projection requires 3 things: industrial capacity, logistical superiority, and deterrence credibility. Lose one, and projection weakens. Lose all 3, and projection ends. Rome reached this moment slowly. By 476 AD, the Western Empire could no longer field a cohesive army. Foreign mercenaries filled the ranks. Borders dissolved. Local warlords controlled territory. The empire did not explode. It receded. France reached it faster. After 1940, French global dominance was over. Even after liberation, France never regained first-tier status. Its empire unraveled. Its military prestige permanently diminished. The Soviet Union reached stage 6 in 1991. After Afghanistan, Eastern Europe broke away. The Baltic states left. The Warsaw Pact dissolved. The Red Army no longer guaranteed control. The superpower collapsed inward. The United States would not collapse identically. History never repeats precisely, but it rhymes structurally. Stage 6 for America would not mean invasion of the homeland. It would mean something subtler. Foreign bases closing, allies forging independent defense arrangements, carrier groups operating closer to home, global commitments scaled back, adversaries acting regionally without fear of intervention, the world reorganizing around multipolar balance, not because America lacks strength, but because sustaining global dominance becomes unsustainable. Military dominance depends on credibility. If China sinks a U.S. carrier, if a major ally loses faith in security guarantees, if war games repeatedly demonstrate insufficient stockpiles, deterrence recalibrates instantly. Once recalibrated, reversal is extraordinarily difficult. Because projection is not about weapons alone. It is about belief. Belief that you will win. Belief that you will show up. Belief that you can sustain conflict longer than anyone else. Once that belief weakens, strategic geography shifts. Markets shift. Alliances shift. History shifts. Stage 6 is not chaos. It is compression. The empire contracts to core territory. Focus shifts inward. Resources prioritize homeland defense. The era of unchallenged global reach ends. The most important lesson from Rome, France, and the Soviet Union is not that collapse is inevitable. It is that collapse is predictable once stage 4 occurs. Recovery requires radical reform, industrial mobilization, doctrinal overhaul, cultural recommitment, strategic concentration. No empire in decline has ever admitted the pattern in time. They believed exceptionalism exempted them. History suggests otherwise. The United States stands at the inflection point. Stage 4 has occurred. Stage 5 is unfolding. Stage 6 depends on what happens next. The clock accelerates, not because of fate, because of structure. The window before irreversibility. History does not move on emotion, it moves on structure. Rome believed its legions were eternal. France believed its fortifications guaranteed safety. The Soviet Union believed scale meant permanence. Each one reached stage 4. Each one assumed it could correct course. None of them did in time. The United States is not weak. It still possesses unmatched resources, advanced technology, global alliances, industrial potential. But the pattern does not ask whether a nation is powerful. It asks whether its trajectory is sustainable. You cannot maintain global dominance with shrinking force structure. You cannot sustain deterrence with aging platforms and fragile supply chains. You cannot project power everywhere while recruitment falters and readiness declines. Reputation buys time. It does not buy immunity. Afghanistan was not collapse. It was exposure. What follows exposure determines everything. Stage 5 can still be interrupted. But interruption requires something rare in history. Honest recognition, strategic reform, industrial rebuilding, doctrinal innovation, and political will strong enough to prioritize readiness over optics. Rome didn't do it. France didn't do it. The Soviet Union didn't do it. They all believed they were different. They all believed the pattern didn't apply to them. History proved otherwise. The question is not whether the 6 stages are real. History proves they are. The question is whether anyone is willing to act before stage 5 becomes irreversible. Because once cascade begins in full, correction becomes exponentially harder. If this analysis gave you a perspective you hadn't considered, then subscribe. History leaves signals. Most people ignore them. The pattern is visible. And once you see them, you can't unsee them.